The first noble truth, as expounded in the profound teachings of Buddhism, is the truth of suffering, known as Dukkha. This foundational principle asserts that suffering is an inherent aspect of existence. It categorizes suffering into three distinct types: the obvious sufferings of pain and distress, the suffering caused by change, and the all-pervasive suffering that arises from conditioned existence. This truth serves as a crucial starting point for spiritual inquiry, prompting an understanding that true peace and liberation require confronting and comprehending the nature of suffering. By recognizing and accepting this pervasive reality, one sets the stage for exploring its causes and ultimately finding a path to its cessation. Suffering is an inherent aspect of existence in the cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth, samsara. This truth is not to convey pessimism, but to provide a realistic foundation for understanding life and motivating the pursuit of enlightenment. The following details various forms of suffering. 1. Birth, hadi, is suffering. According to Buddhism, the duration of each phenomenon consists of three phases, namely genesis, static or development, and dissolution. The moment of genesis is birth, the moment of dissolution is death, and the static phase is aging. By the birth of a being is meant the genesis of the new mind and matter after death upon dissolution of the old existence, i.e., the first germ of life in the new existence. No suffering or pain as such exists, of course, at the first moment of genesis, but since birth serves as the basis for later appearance of physical and mental suffering throughout the whole of the ensuing existence, birth is considered as suffering. Many people often use the metaphor. Look at newborns who cry as soon as they are born, even before their eyes open to see the world. Or a familiar phrase from a philosopher, sad news from the day our mother bears us. These expressions carry a melancholy meaning. To be born is to suffer, and to be reborn is to suffer. Dukkha. 2. Aging, jara, is suffering. Aging means becoming gray-haired, toothless, wrinkled, bent, deaf and poor in eyesight. In other words, decay has set in very recognizably in the aggregates of mind and matter of a particular existence. Aging of the mind is not so apparent, and indications of it such as failing memory and senility become noticeable only when one becomes very old, and then only to those close to oneself. Aging is concerned with just the static moment of the aggregates of mind and matter and has no essence of pain or suffering in it. But because of aging, there occurs a failure of vitality, impairment of the sense faculties, weakening of health, loss of youth, strength, and good looks. People are really afraid of growing old. Since it forms the source of physical and mental suffering, aging is said to be fearful dukkha. Have you ever looked at yourself in the mirror every day? Do you not notice that today you are older than previous days? Have you ever looked at old photos of your grandparents, parents from their youth and recent pictures, or your own from high school and university? Might you laugh humorously at the differences in those images, but deep down, do you and those in the photos feel a bit sad? If you wouldn't prefer a common term, it is suffering. 3. Death, marana, is suffering. Death is the extinction of the life principle, which has been in ceaseless operation since the time of birth in a particular existence. All mortals are in constant fear of death. But death is not by itself pain or suffering, as it is the moment of dissolution of the life principle of the aggregates of mind and matter. However, when death comes, one has to abandon the physical body and leave behind one's family and friends together with one's properties. The thought of leaving the present existence and the uncertainty of the future is very frightening. As death draws near, all mortal beings are subjected to severe attacks of disease and illness, which rack the body with unbearable pain. Death, which is the basis for all such physical and mental agony, has thus been named Dukkha by the Buddha. Have you ever imagined the scene of your death one day? Although this thought might be considered negative in Buddhism, it is a frequently mentioned reminder, though Buddhism does not carry a negative or pessimistic meaning. If not, you have probably witnessed the days leading up to the departure of a loved one. That is truly painful and profoundly sad. 4. Sorrow, sokha, is suffering. Sorrow is the burning in the mind of one affected by the 5 kinds of misfortune, bayasana, namely, loss of relatives, destruction of property or possessions, deterioration of health and longevity, lapses in morality and deviation from right view to wrong view. This sorrow is a form of mental displeasure, domanassa, but has inner consuming as its characteristic and as such is intrinsic suffering, dukkha. Overwhelming distress occasioned by sorrow can cause heartburn leading to premature aging and even death. Being thus a basis for other physical pains too, sorrow is fearsome and is therefore named dukkha by the Buddha. Have you ever felt sad? What is that feeling like? Have you ever tried to measure how much of your life sadness occupies compared to happiness? Philosophically, you will learn that even those quick joys are accompanied by, or lead to, sorrows and suffering. 5. Lamentation, parideva, is suffering. Lamentation is wailing by one affected by the loss of relatives, property, and any other losses or suffering. Absent-mindedly and hysterically, the distressed one clamors, proclaiming the virtues of the dead and the quality of the lost property or denouncing the enemy or agency responsible for the loss. In reality, lamentation is merely the material quality of sound and therefore not suffering in essence. But such wailing and hysterical proclamations produce physical discomfort and pain. The Buddha had therefore declared lamentation as suffering. To cry is to be subjected to pain, which is therefore suffering. Have you ever cried out in pain? Or heard a child's piercing cry or many people lamenting in distress? 6. Physical pain, dukkha, is suffering. Bodily pains such as stiffness, aches, soreness, tiredness, itchiness, and feeling hot or cold are suffering. These physical pains are true intrinsic suffering called dukkha. Even animals flee to safety at the slightest hint of getting beaten or shot at because they are afraid of physical pain. It is important to know that sickness and disease come under this category of physical pain. Physical pain is generally followed by mental distress, and for thus serving as a cause for mental pain, it is named dukkha, dreadful suffering. Have you ever had a cold or fever so severe you were delirious? Have you ever been hospitalized for a painful illness or just visited someone in the hospital and seen hundreds of people lying in pain? 7. Mental displeasure, domanassa, is suffering. The Pali word domanassa means bad-mindedness or mental pain. It denotes all sorts of mental aversion or displeasure such as worry, anxiety, depression, dislike, hate, fear, misery, etc. Mental displeasure also is intrinsic suffering that not only oppresses the mind but also tortures the body, such as causing stress, insomnia, and loss of appetite with consequent impairment of health and even the advent of death. It is a truly formidable dukkha. 8. Despair, upayasa, is suffering. Despair is ill humor or dejection produced by excessive mental agony in one affected by the loss of loved ones, property, and any other losses or suffering. It causes repeated bemoaning over the loss, resulting in burning of the mind and physical distress, and can even lead to insanity or suicide. Despair is therefore suffering because of the intense burning of the mind and physical pain accompanying it. People accordingly recognize the state of despair as a fearsome dukkha. As an illustration, sorrow, sokha, is like cooking of oil or dye solution in a pot over a slow fire. Lamentation, parideva, is like it's boiling over when cooking over a quick fire. Despair, upayasa, is like what remains in the pot after it has boiled over and being unable to do so anymore, goes on cooking in the pot till it dries up. Have you ever felt desperate about something, like failing a test when you were young? Have you seen people who, despite their utmost efforts throughout life, still struggle daily for food and clothing, living in endless despair? Or have you seen or read about wealthy people living and dying in despair over spiritual emptiness and life's meaninglessness? As an illustration, sorrow, sokha, is like simmering oil or dye in a pot over a low, continuous heat. Crying out, parideva, is like boiling a pot vigorously over a high flame. Desperation, upayasa, is like the thick oil or dye remaining after it has been boiled continuously and reduced to a residue, burnt and charred. 9. Association with the hateful is suffering. Association with the hateful is meeting with disagreeable beings or undesirable objects. Such meeting is not itself unbearable pain, but in such situations, reaction sets in at once in the form of mental disturbance and physical discomposure. As it serves as a cause of mental and physical distress, the Buddha designated it as dukkha, dreadful suffering. 10. Separation from the beloved is suffering. Separation from the beloved is not itself a painful feeling. However, when separation takes place, by death or while still alive, from beloved ones or when parted from one's treasured possessions, mental agony sets in at once. As it promotes various mental afflictions, the Buddha had called the separation from the loved ones and desirable objects dukkha, dreadful suffering. This, everyone knows, is unavoidable suffering in a life that is always changing. Leaving home, homeland, places, beloved ones, losing mother, father, loved ones, or even losing possessions, money, or a cherished item, all are inevitable sufferings in life. 11. Not getting what one desires is suffering. Not getting what one desires is not itself a painful feeling, but the unfulfilled desire often results in great disappointment, despair, and may even lead to suicide. Suffering also arises out of desire for some unobtainable object, such as the desire to be free from suffering. Without practicing and developing the Noble Eightfold Path, freedom from suffering is unobtainable by mere wishing, and not getting what one wants causes mental anguish. Here, the object of one's desire also includes the worldly gains and wealth that cannot be attained by mere desire. Not getting them as one desires is also dukkha. While it may seem humorous, have you ever seen the faces of many people when they talk about wealth and happiness they have strived for but never achieved? Have you ever tried opening a business hoping to improve your life but found yourself losing customers every day and falling into debt? What does that feel like? Have you ever experienced joy that lasts forever? No, it will sooner or later end, inevitably leading to dissatisfaction. In short, the 5 aggregates of clinging are suffering. A sentient being is made up of the 5 aggregates or groups that form the objects of clinging or grasping. The 5 aggregates of clinging or grasping, upadana khandha, are the aggregate of matter or material forms, rupa khandha, the aggregate of feeling, vedana khandha, the aggregate of perception, sanna khandha, the aggregate of volitional activities, sankhara khandha, the aggregate of consciousness, vijnana khandha. All sentient beings exist as such only with these 5 aggregates forming their substantive mass. They cling to their body, which is merely an aggregate of material forms, regarding it as I, my body, permanent, etc. Hence, the group of material forms is called an aggregate of clinging. The mental groups made up of feeling, perception, mental activities, and consciousness are also grasped at, taking them to be I, my mind, it is I who thinks, permanent, etc. Hence, they are also called aggregates of clinging. Example of the 5 aggregates of clinging at the moment of seeing. The eye and the visible object are the material aggregate. Feeling pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral is the feeling aggregate. Recognizing or remembering the object is the perception aggregate. To will to see and turn the attention to the object is the volitional activities aggregate. Just knowing that an object is seen is the consciousness aggregate. Suffering because of the 5 aggregates of clinging. Dukkha dukkha, or intrinsic suffering. The 11 types of suffering, starting from the suffering of birth to the suffering of not getting what one wants, are all obvious types of suffering known as dukkha dukkha or intrinsic suffering. They arise only because there are the 5 aggregates of clinging. Without them, such suffering will not arise. In short, because there is body or the material aggregate, physical and mental sufferings dependent on the body arise. Because there are feeling, perception, volitional activities, and consciousness aggregates, physical and mental sufferings based on them also arise. Thus, the 5 aggregates of clinging are dukkha dukkha, intrinsic suffering. Cases of dukkha not so obvious that occur as a result of the operation of the law of change are called viparinama dukkha, suffering due to change. Viparinama dukkha, or suffering due to change. Pleasurable physical sensations arising from agreeable tactile impressions, touch, are called pleasant bodily feelings. Joyful states of mind arising from reviewing pleasurable sense objects are called pleasant mental feelings. These 2 forms of happy states please all beings. All beings go after these states all the time, even at the risk of their lives, and when these are attained, their happiness knows no bound. However, while they are rejoicing with blissful contentment, if the sense objects that have given them so much happiness and delight disappear or get destroyed, great would be their agitation followed by agony. When the wealth that they have accumulated in the form of money or property suddenly gets lost for one reason or another. When death or separation comes to their loved ones. Intense grief and distress ensue, which can even cause derangement. Thus, these 2 forms of happiness, namely pleasant physical and mental feelings, are also a type of suffering because of change. Because they arise dependent on the 5 aggregates, the 5 aggregates of clinging are viparinama dukkha, suffering due to change. See sankhara dukkha, or suffering due to conditioning. The word sankhara in sabbe sankhara dukkha, or all conditioned things are suffering, here means conditioned things or resultants of determining conditions. It has a different meaning from the sankhara in sankhara khandha, which means volitional activities. The five aggregates of clinging are always in a state of flux, impermanent, and none of them are self-existing. They arise out of various causes. They are conditioned. Their existence depends on certain conditions, and when these conditions and causes cease to exist, they too cease to exist. As death awaits constantly, having to rely on the impermanent aggregates of clinging for physical substance or support is dreadful, like living in a building that shows signs of collapsing at any moment. The transitory nature of the five aggregates of clinging requires constant effort at conditioning for the maintenance of the status quo, e.g., the body needs constant feeding to survive, and feelings of happiness require constant contact with agreeable sense objects. Even the everyday medial neutral feelings need effort at conditioning, e.g., without adequate rain, there is a shortage of water and everyone suffers the effect of the drought. This implies laborious effort, which, of course, is dukkha. Therefore, the five aggregates of clinging are sankhara dukkha, suffering due to conditioning. Summary. The five aggregates of clinging are intrinsic suffering, suffering due to change and suffering due to conditioning. In short, the five aggregates of clinging are the noble truth of suffering. Understanding suffering. To truly understand the first noble truth is not merely to intellectually acknowledge these forms of suffering, but to see them clearly as they manifest in one's own life and the lives of others. This awareness is the first step on the path to liberation. It cultivates a profound compassion for all beings ensnared in the cycle of samsara and motivates the pursuit of nirvana. The practice. The contemplation of the first noble truth involves observing suffering in all areas of life and recognizing its impermanent and impersonal nature. This practice develops insight into the true nature of existence, leading to dispassion and detachment from the clinging that perpetuates suffering. Thus, the first noble truth serves as the starting point for the spiritual journey in Buddhism, setting the stage for the exploration of its cause, its cessation, and the path leading to its cessation. Reflect deeply on this truth, for it is the gateway to deeper wisdom and eventual freedom. Thank you for watching. If you like it, do not forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, leave comments, and share with fellow truth seekers. Wishing you good health and inner peace every day.